Views and opinions expressed in this production are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Shooters Nation or our sponsors. Information provided on this show is not a replacement for legal counsel or professional training. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows.
Welcome to the Shooters Nation podcast, the talk show for you, the armed citizen. Join us as we discuss guns and gear, training, mindset and knowledge, industry news and buzz, and of course, the firearms culture. Be sure to join us after the show at shootersnation.com and become part of the Shooters Nation.
Hello and welcome to the Shooters Nation podcast. I'm your host, David Yancey, here at our studio in Nashville, Tennessee, and co-hosting with me in New Hampshire via the magic of technology is Mark Lancaster. Mark, how's it going, man?
It is going well. How are you doing?
I'm slowly but surely dying from allergies, I think. I don't know. Everything that's trying to bloom in Tennessee is absolutely trying to kill me. So
we left my son's stroller outside for like 2 days and went to use it today, and it's like covered in yellow from pollen.
God, yeah, it's
brutal.
It's the devil's spores.
Car wash.
Yeah, right. Run through a car wash and or burn it. I don't know. It's terrible, man. This stuff. I've not been myself all day. So if my voice cracks, I'm not going through second puberty. It's really just allergies. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's second puberty. I have no idea. So joining us tonight as our special guest and subject matter expert for the episode, the author of the Civilian Defender blog, co-founder of the Paul E. Palooza Memorial Training Conference, practicing dental surgeon, reserve police officer, and instructor, Dr. Sherman House. Sherman, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure to get you on here. For the audience, I had a class with you. I don't know, what's it been, about a month ago now? Something like that?
The 26th of May.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good. Yeah. And that was fun. It was the civilian hemorrhage arrest course, and that was eye-opening. It not only did it expose me to things that I hadn't even really thought of before, as far as just the necessity to know how to stop the bleeding, but it started me on a kick of wanting to go after more civilian medical training. So very timely conversation.
One of your classmates has already used his training. Did you know that?
Are you serious?
Yeah, that young gent that was the former armored car crewman.
Yeah.
That works at the range.
Yeah.
Yeah, a guy coded out there. So he had to go to work on him.
At the range?
Yeah, at the range. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's not what I would have thought he would have had to use at the range.
That's what I agree. Yeah.
Especially not at that range.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I've seen the way that some of the off-duty police officers shoot at that range, and yeah, it's terrible. It's a travesty.
Well, that's not just at that range, probably. Unfortunately, that's probably a nationwide phenomenon.
I think that's an issue for a whole nother episode. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. And I mean, that brings to mind how important civilian medical skills are. And that's why we wanted to have you on the show, was just to talk about being the first responder, and particularly what are the medical skills that every person should possess. And when I began to think about this, and we've had some conversations with some of our past podcast guests about just basic civilian medical, you were a first thought for me. It's like, well, we really need to get Dr. House on here and talk about this. And I'm really pleased to have you here. I think the audience, I think the audience is really going to find that you're an extremely engaging and very competent instructor in these things. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's see here. Normally I guess this is where I tell people about our guests, and I admit I've scraped your blog and I've looked for things about you. Do you mind if I introduce you to the folks, or would you like to do it?
That'd be great.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, so folks, Dr. House, and yes, that really is your name. You are Dr. House, which is fantastic.
I really am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was Dr. House long before Gregory House was.
Right. Yeah. So, and wait, you at the class, you mentioned your brother is also a doctor.
Yeah, and his name is Phil, so we call him Dr. Phil, and my family calls me Dr. House. So
Right.
we have a Dr. Phil and a Dr. House. So it's quite celebrity Thanksgiving meals and what have you.
It's brilliant. I'm jealous. All right. So, Dr. House is currently in his 22nd year as a healthcare provider and is a hospital special needs and general dentist just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Prior to his career in dentistry, Dr. House was a fireman and an EMT in Washington State. Concurrently, you were also a shotgun messenger for several West Coast armored truck companies. But wait, there's more. Dr. House holds undergraduate degrees in law enforcement, cell biology, and philosophy from Gonzaga University. Philosophy, really, that's intriguing.
Yeah, it's actually a little more specialized than that. It's a dual degree in metaphysics, epistemology, and medical ethics. So yeah, it's.
We got to have you back on just to talk about that.
I read a lot of books.
Absolutely. Obviously you do. So you completed your doctorate of dental surgery at the Meharry Medical College with honors here in Nashville, Tennessee, and you earned a Hospital Dentistry Certificate as the chief resident from the Metro General Hospital, also Nashville. Dr. House is the originator of the civilian defender training concept, and he's personally saved lives using CPR, rescue breathing, automated external defibrillator, tactical combat casualty care, advanced cardiac life support, pre-hospital trauma life support, and Heimlich maneuver techniques. And Sherman, your bio said that you also have studied extensively in the defensive arts, both armed and unarmed, as well as self-defense law, emergency medicine, criminal psychology, tactical driving, and other survival skills from a list of instructors, which honestly reads like the who's who of the training industry. And for those that are interested in really your complete biography, I would encourage them to head over to your blog. It's civiliandefender.com and view the about page. But honestly, this sounds like if your dentist isn't like this, then your dentist sucks and you should look for somebody like Sherman. Right?
Well, I think there's only a couple of dentists maybe in the country that are quite have my or something that's analogous to my pedigree. That's not necessarily it's a rarity, but it's also not necessarily something that I would look for in the yellow pages. Well, you're probably not going to find it. The only other guy I can think of that's kind of close to it is like Dr. Gary Roberts that goes off. He's known as Doc GKR.
Doc GKR, yeah.
He's chief wound physician for the United States Special Operations Command. Most people think that he's an MD, but they don't realize that he's also a hospital dentist. He's a professor at one of the UCLA schools, I believe.
Oh, wow. No, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. And also, reserve police officer, naval officer.
Yeah.
So he's kind of got a weirdo background like me too. So,
let's not call it weirdo. I would say that you and Doc GKR are like the term would be well heeled, right? So, I mean, you've seen some stuff, you've done some things, you've traveled well, you've accumulated a lot of diverse knowledge, and that's honestly.
I always just tell people, when people say like, "Wow," I just say like, I'm a Renaissance man. When I was young, I would tell the physicians that were kind of my mentors, like, "Hey, don't you ever kind of think that it would be cool to be, an intellectual physician like Anton Chekhov, that did all these things and wrote books?" And they're like, "Kid, you're like in the wrong business if that's what you want to do." And I was like, "No, I refuse to believe that. Like, I do not accept your answer. Like, there's no reason why, someone can't be, a polymath that is, skilled and achieves a level of mastery in more than one subject field. I think that's, the world is too focused on specialization these days." So,
yeah. Well, it kind of spells out the story. Well, it spells out the story that you're a perpetual student, and that's great. That's one of the things that I liked about learning from you was that you, I think you were very clear in the class, that this is a way to do this, and a lot of this, there are some irrefutable facts that are based in medical science here, but you're willing to learn and adapt and try new things. And if you find a new skill that works, then you bring that and try to provide that back to your students. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's funny. Right after your class, we were watching a TV program called, well, anyway, I won't say what it's called, but it was about, combat medicine in a war zone. And I knew one of the medics there, I'm very good friends with him. So I just texted him and I said, hey, I noticed on this program, this guy was wound packing this way. Like, is that how you guys are doing it now? And he was like, no, like, I said, well, I not to like sharpshooter Monday morning quarterback, but, from a doctor to an EMT, it might not want to do that. Like on the next one, don't do that that way. And he was like, that's cool. I'll tell him, and so I was like, okay, because the first thing that I do, and I kind of talked about this a little bit in your class, one of the things that I appreciate now, in retrospect, I did not appreciate at the time because you don't understand the significance of it. But when you're in undergrad and you're having to take, 2 years of biology and 2 years of chemistry and biochemistry and, a couple of years of physics, you kind of get to the point sometimes where a lot of people have breakdowns, when you're in pre-med education. That's why the dropout rate for it is about 90%. But a lot of times you kind of go, what the heck am I learning all this stuff for? And the reason that you learn all that stuff is because if you have a very solid grounding in the science, you can kind of suss your way out of other problems and determine just based on the merits of the science, whether or not something's going to work. And if you have a very advanced understanding of the science, that only is a feather in your cap as you get further along in your career. So there's a lot of times when, people will come to me and say like, hey, you need to try this technique, or, you need to try this product or this medicine or whatever. And I'll say, explain to me, how this works. And then they tell me, and I think like, there's an error in the science here, or there's an error in my understanding. Help me understand which it is. Right. And a lot of times it's not my understanding.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's one of those things. And when I talked about it in your class, I said, the thing I like about it is that it gives, if you're a capable scientist, then you have the power to go into any of these separate fields of medicine and understand from a very, very fundamental foundational basis how it all works and whether or not it makes sense. And it doesn't matter, what it is, because you get enough science in your undergraduate degree and you get enough basic medical science when you're in your professional degree that you can kind of put all the pieces together and make sense. And then, of course, when you do something pragmatic, now, like you said, I mean, there isn't a lot of dentists out there, even dentists, that do OR stuff, that are doing trauma medicine. I was really lucky that when I went to Metro General, where I did my residency, that you know where that is. I mean, that's right in North Nashville.
It's not a nice part of town.
Not a nice part of town. And, and a lot of people end up there, not of their own accord, but because they've been shot and they don't end up going to Vanderbilt.
Right.
So, you get a very good basis in emergency medicine, like very quick. And then it kind of built on everything that I'd seen in the decade before as an EMT. And then, it just kind of compounds from there, and all that stuff, goes with your education, your training, and your experience kind of amalgamate together into what you know and what you have command of. And so that's worked out really well for me.
That's pretty awesome.
I kind of like jokingly say that I'm either the most unluckiest guy in the world or the people that I encounter are the luckiest people in the world, but somebody's getting the short end of the stick. It's probably me. But I'm lucky that I've been in, locations and times and on the road before when I've encountered something. And, I just think like, I mean, if I would have left the house 5 minutes earlier, I would have been past this when it happened.
Right. Well, that's a good segue into some of the conversation that I was hoping that we could do tonight. Mark and I, we've had several guests now that have spoken about just the general necessity and practicality of basic medical skills, but we haven't really gone too in depth with it. I think at most, Mark, would you agree? We've kind of talked about just the necessity of a tourniquit. And
I mean, that's very much to scratch the surface. And, and frankly, it's just because I don't have enough to speak to it, with an educated mindset at all, because I really need, it's definitely a hole in my skill set. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's me. And that's part of the journey that I'm on right now, is to try to fill that in. Sure. I've gotten pretty good with a gun, but I've kind of had this idea that if I know how to put holes in things, then I should probably know how to patch holes as well. And especially if they are in the wrong people, or me, or my, somebody I care about. Yeah.
Well, the gun stuff is the fun stuff. So, everybody wants to do the run and gun, and, even if it's 100 degrees outside, it's not that rough to be out on the range, under the sun shooting. And, but, take that same day on the range or wherever, and, put a medical class in there, and then suddenly it becomes work. And you saw just in the class that we did in an air-conditioned building,
mm-hmm.
I mean, once you get down on the ground, you start actually doing that stuff, everybody's got sweat underneath their eyes. Just because, you're down on the ground, everybody's interest is a little bit piqued, even though it's a simulated thing. People's brains kind of screw with them, and they start to psych themselves out a little bit about these kinds of things.
Right.
And that's not a fun situation. So whether or not you realize it, you're going to be like naturally risk averse to doing things that don't appeal to your reward system in your brain. And that thing that doesn't, just like force on force training doesn't, just like, mindset type training, relative to violent criminal actors and things like that, that doesn't really appeal to the part of your brain that goes like, hey, this is fun, because it makes you involuntarily face realities that none of us want to think about. And the thing is if you don't think about those, and then you end up in that situation, you will, be stuck basically in a decision-making tree haze, unable to direct your movement towards anything purposeful, because you've never thought those things through before.
Yeah. What is it? The old saying, failure to plan is planning to fail.
Yeah. And it's, I always, you probably saw like on my class, like the little buzz line is, when you prepare for an emergency, the emergency ceases to exist. So, there was a class where, you met my son in the class. Yeah. He's 12 years old, and I don't have him like go around and sharpshoot people's techniques, when they're putting on the different interventions and stuff. Right. I'll probably wait till he's about 16 before I let him start doing that. But I mean, he's seen this stuff for a long time now, like for years, like, and one time he was at a class and he just didn't eat anything before we went, and his blood sugar, I think, kind of got low, and he passed out. And, just gave him some orange juice and elevated his legs and stuff. And he came back. And afterwards, like, people were coming up to me going like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And they're like, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I do this stuff for a living." Yeah. And they said, "Well, that's your kid." And I said, "Yes, I do this stuff for a living."
Right. Yeah.
And they were like, I remember this woman was just kind of like shocked that I was, I wasn't cavalier about it, but it's like, if you do this stuff all the time, and whether, people realize it or not, 9 out of 10 people that are going to the dentist are just on the verge of either having a heart attack, throwing up, or passing out.
Oh, no kidding.
And just because people are so anxious, especially related to surgical stuff.
Right.
I have to peel people off the ceiling on a fairly regular basis. So,
right.
It's just,
well, I guess, so this lady she thought you should have been all freaked out and panicked about your son's condition and your familiarity with the medical science behind it. You're like, no, we'll do this, this, and this, and we're good.
Yeah. And I mean, like, 20 minutes later, it was like nothing had ever happened.
Yeah. Well, Mark, Mark's made the comment before on here that especially men, we like to go to the range and shoot nice tight little groupings and stuff, but we don't like to do things that are competitive or might expose our weaknesses or our ignorance in things. And so that's probably a big, factor in the desire to or not to take a medical training class, because you need to kind of put your ego to the side and say, I don't know this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's enough variables involved in medical stuff that even if you do know it, a lot of times you still have to be, kind of an agile thinker, because, you might find yourself in a situation where the parameters don't meet anything that you've done in training thus far.
Mm-hmm.
I remember just like, I hate to just like war story you to death because you've already heard,
the guests or the audience haven't. So, go ahead.
But the very first time I ever saw somebody impaled in a car accident, that was impaled on a fence post.
Time out. Any war story that starts out with the very first time I saw a guy impaled is definitely a story that you're welcome to tell. So if you have more of those, if there's like a second time you've seen a guy impaled, you can tell that one too.
It's kind of like, a lot of things in life. Like once you get past the first one, you don't realize that they're everywhere. It's like when you buy a car that you haven't had before, you're like, holy smokes, there's Toyota Tacomas everywhere.
Right.
I never realized there are so many of them. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. You never realize like how frequently people get impaled, but guess what? It happens every day. Especially if you work in an area where there's agriculture or slick roads.
Oh yeah.
And I worked in both. So, the very first time I ever saw somebody impaled, I was like, okay, an impaled object. I'm going through my, kind of pre-hospital trauma life support checklist in my head, but then I'm like, there's a big piece of fence. This was a a piece of steel, green and white fence post, and it has the slats for the wire to sit in it.
Oh yeah.
And, like those basically kind of form like hooks, like barbs. So so you can't just cut it off and hope that it comes out. So anyway, the long story short of that is that you have to saw it off at both ends and then ship the person on their side with that piece in place, and then let the OR handle that. So there's a lot of the situations where you have to be able to kind of think in 4 dimensions and figure out the best solution at that moment. And what a lot of people second guess and don't realize and stuff is that the situation at that moment might be one thing, but 3 minutes later or even 90 seconds later, it could be a whole other situation. So you don't ever, it's really hard to, second guess people on this kind of stuff. Not to say that people don't. I mean, people second guess everybody on everything these days because everybody thinks that they're entitled to have their own opinion.
It's a sport. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, with this kind of stuff, the situation can change so quick and a patient's status can change so quick that you really have to be sharp and be capable and be able to, kind of go, all right, I did all this and it didn't work. What can I do next? And, pretty sure that this rain isn't going to get me better,
right.
We got to do this. So,
well, I guess to bring it home to the folks that are familiar with the gun, but not familiar with the tourniquet, in firearms training, especially with semi-automatic pistols, we learn tap, rack, bang. If you're sorting through a problem, it's a diagnostic. Here are the steps to the diagnostic. And as long as you understand why you're doing them, if at any point in that diagnostic procedure, something wonky happens, the base plate comes popping off the mag or whatever, that doesn't freak you out. You just, okay, well, the next step is now I'm going to eject the mag or whatever. So in medical, with a little bit of foundational knowledge, you're not going to become Dr. House, but you'll at least have something that says, okay, wait, I'm not going to panic. Let's continue with the logical process of solving this problem. So let me ask, what, with that in mind, what are some of the basic medical skills that you feel like every person should possess regardless of their profession or their daily responsibilities? Joe Citizen or Joanne Citizen.
Well, kind of like just following on with what you said, like, I think it's sort of analogous to, the classes that I teach are sort of analogous to the non-diagnostic malfunction clearance, which is, unload the pistol, reload the pistol, and keep shooting.
Right.
And you don't have to be able to, look at it and figure out, like, is this a type 1? Is this a type 2? Is this a type 3? Do I need to flop, rack, replace, and do all this stuff to make it happen? I can just do this one thing, and 99% of the time it works, as designed. So with that said, when I was in junior high, they used to show us these, it was a division of our health class. And it was like every Thursday, and the guy that was the head of the Rocket Club, his name was Mr. Nicholson, taught the class. I loved it. It was like one of my favorite classes. And unfortunately, it was only for an hour, and I think it was for like half of a year. But they would show us these really, really morbid videotape, not videos, sorry. They were actually reel-to-reel, 35 millimeter films, or whatever millimeter that was back in those days. Maybe it was smaller than 35, probably 18 millimeter. Or something like that. But, on a movie projector in the class.
Yeah, the old noisy ones that would put you to sleep if you sat too close to them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
not that ever happened to me.
All of these, me neither. These really gory videos, of like, what do you do when you're, playing in the woods with your friends and one of your buddies impales himself on a stick, or how do you, put a tourniquet using like a handkerchief or something on somebody, in addition to all these things, like you had to learn CPR in that class and learn the Heimlich maneuver. So we don't have that stuff anymore. And I'm not sure like where that ever fell off. I was fortunate enough to grow up kind of in a naval community, with an AL, not an EL. But, they really emphasize, things like preparedness and survival, just I think because, back in those days, even though it was the early 80s, it was still kind of like sort of all hands on deck mentality, like Pearl Harbor happened once to the Navy and by God, if it ever happened again, they wanted everybody to be able to, manage as best as they could.
Yeah, be prepared.
At least that's what I always kind of told myself. And then, I think, at that time too, it was very much part of the culture to be involved in either the Boy Scouts or the Eagle Scouts, which is, kind of gone by the wayside these days too. So, I watched all these videos and I really took all that stuff to heart, very much. And, like I told you, the very first time that I ever did any of this stuff was when I was 13 years old, and it was on my own brother, who actually went into respiratory arrest secondary to an insulin reaction.
Oh, wow.
Because he was diabetic. So his blood sugar got low enough that his brain no longer had the drive to encourage him to breathe. So we were home by ourselves after school one day, and he just turned gray and stopped breathing right at the kitchen table.
Oh, wow.
So I had to like take him down to the ground and do rescue breathing on him until the ambulance got there. And then they put an IV on him and, gave him some glucose or some dextrose. And then he, came back to life shortly after that.
That's a baptism by fire. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was basically a kid, not even, old enough to drive at that point. And then a few years later when I was working on getting and that happened 2 more times to my brother before I was 16. So then when I was 16, I had my learner's permit. The deal was if you want to drive the family car, which was an Astro van, you had to wash it and vacuum it before my mom would go out and drive it with me. And so I was outside washing it. And at that time I was a law enforcement cadet. Okay. And which, basically was almost like an unarmed reserve kind of.
Yeah. I think they call them the police explorers or something like that sometimes.
Correct.
Yeah,
exactly. And so, I was outside washing my mom's van, and one of my friends from the police department pulled up in a patrol car, and he said, "Hey, the fire department's a long ways off. They're coming from the hospital, and your neighbor's having a heart attack, so come help me." So I jumped in the patrol car with him. We literally went about 10 or 12 houses, down and around the corner from our house, and went inside this guy's room, and he was like, coded, like basically, it's pulse synaptic. He was dead.
Wow.
On the sofa. We pulled him down on the ground. And, at this point, I'd never done compressions before. I'd only done rescue breathing before because my brother's heart had never stopped. And so, we get him down on the ground, and I do my, find my landmarks and start doing compressions. And I felt his sternum come, completely off of his ribs.
Oh, wow.
And it made like a very audible, as you can imagine, like, kind of noise like that. That's a really bad imitation, but you get the point.
Right, yeah. I've heard it referred to as cracking or popping.
A really loud zipper, a piece of burlap ripping, and I was terrified. And I looked at my partner, and he said, "You're doing good, buddy. Just keep going." And I said, "Okay." And I kind of got that out of my head, like, I'm doing this wrong. This is like, it feels different on a real person than it feels on a dummy, on a CPR dummy. Or, back in those days, we had the Resuscita Annie, which was this really creepy looking blonde haired mannequin in a sweatsuit. and it wasn't anything like that at all. So nothing like that. And so we ended up doing CPR on the guy for quite a while. We were both very sweaty by the time the fire department got there. And they, defibrillated him a few times. And he actually came back to life, but he succumbed later to an infection.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first CPR save.
So CPR definitely on the list of things that people should know. And I think maybe if you've never done it before, there's some physicality involved in this. We're talking about in the class, it's a workout when you talk about when you're really, I think the mantra is press hard, press fast, about a 2.5 or 1.5 to 2 inch depth compression on a chest. You're going to town. I mean, that's sweating to the oldies kind of work, trying to.
And you're shooting, for like 100 reps in a minute.
Right.
Like 100 to 120 reps
like
in a
2
minute.
a second.
So, yeah, that's very fast. Like if you, it's hard to hit a speed bag that fast.
Right.
It's very rigorous movement, and when all this stuff is going on and there's literally somebody that's like dead or dying underneath your hands, the first 30 or 40 times you do that, it's definitely an acute experience. So yeah, it's one of those things that when I teach those classes, or I've been in those classes and stuff, I always kind of tell people, like, this is a good thing to have, but you really honestly, like, hope that you never ever have to use it, because it's really horrible. I get kind of like detached from it clinically, because if nothing more, I've done it enough times that if I got emotionally involved in it, I would be like physically ill.
Sure.
And more of my hair would fall out than already has.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's a really traumatic thing.
And so, I mean, there's no guarantee that even if you're rendering CPR successfully or correctly, that you're going to be successful in that endeavor, because this is a resuscitative exercise.
Correct. Yeah. You only do CPR on people that are dead.
Right.
So the worst thing that can happen is nothing at all. Where you have no result at all. And I can honestly say, in my career at this point, I've done CPR or participated in a team CPR resuscitation event, either with me and the guys at the fire department, or me and the guys in the emergency room, or me and the OR staff rather. Mm-hmm. Probably like 1,200, 1,500 times, something like that.
Okay.
It's one of those things that it happens regularly, especially if you go to a place like Vanderbilt, which is a trauma center for the area, people come in there every shift that, have CPR in progress. And it's very rare that kind of stuff gets started in the ambulance. It's usually going in the field. People don't usually die, honestly, in the ambulance. They die either before they get in the ambulance or they die after they get out. It's very...
Which honestly speaks to the necessity of people to know these medical skills and be able to render care on the spot. It goes back to the title of the episode, you being the first responder. We each are the first responder if we are capable of providing some care.
Right. Yeah. It's like I said in your class, if as the EMT or the firefighter or the police officer, I'm the second responder. I'm not the first responder. You're the first responder, And one of my buddies, Jay Gibson, he says, you're 100% present at 100% of your own emergencies.
Oh, yeah.
So, whatever you want that rescuer, to come with there as far as the skills, the training and the equipment to be able to rescue you in whatever manner you require to be rescued, whether it's, somebody with guns and armor and radios and a bunch of friends with guns and armor and radios, or if it's somebody with, radios and ambulance and a whole bunch of, drugs and equipment to save your life with, it's pretty important for you to already have at least a cursory command of those skills. So that was a really long, winded, roundabout way to say that, absolutely, positively, you got to have CPR, rescue breathing, Heimlich maneuver for everybody.
Do they generally package those three in a class together, or is that?
They do.
Okay.
I always get it mixed up in my head, whether it's the American Red Cross or the American Heart Association, which one does which, just because they should change their name so they both don't have American.
Well,
but anyway.
I can help. So I've been looking for myself to try to get, started on this journey, and American Red Cross definitely has. If you go onto their website, you can find classes. And so that,
I think that they usually,
they both might. I don't know.
They bundle it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But even I've never seen a class where it's like standalone rescue breathing or, standalone Heimlich. They're always incorporated with CPR. And then most of them these days, they'll just kind of like give sort of short shrift to the Heimlich maneuver and rescue breathing, which is probably smart with the rescue breathing because it's a treatment algorithm. So, you only do CPR on dead people. Like I said, you have to have no pulse and not be breathing. But if you get down and you realize that somebody's not breathing, but they have a pulse, you don't want to start doing chest compressions on them because that's not going to help their situation. Their problem isn't a pump problem. Their problem is an oxygen problem.
What about? I'm sorry. Well, I was going to say, what about the automated external defibrillator, the AED? I see that mentioned in close proximity to those other two, CPR and Heimlich. Is that?
That's a really important thing too. And now, AEDs used to be not that super commonplace, but now they're everywhere. I mean, they're in restaurants, they're in Sam's Clubs. I think you can even buy them at some of the Sam's Club, Walmart, Costco's, things like that.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
And even off of Amazon. Now that I think about it, and they run off of 10 CR123A batteries.
The same kind that you put in your weapon lights?
In your weapon light or in your tactical flashlight, it's the same type of battery. And they, if somebody is having basically two kinds of arrhythmias, an arrhythmia is a physiological state of their heart that is, not congruent with life. At least not in the long term. And that's either two things. One's called ventricular fibrillation, when your heart doesn't function in a synchronized manner anymore, allowing it to pump. So it just basically kind of like bubbles around and sort of pulses like a bowl of gelatin. It just doesn't
kind
really
of quivering. It's
much.
not. Yeah.
It's just quivering and it's not anything organized. The only thing that can remove it from that state is a defibrillator with a directed delivery of electricity. And then the other thing is what we call like a pulseless VTAC, which is where the rhythm is organized, but it's so fast that the blood doesn't flow into the heart and then come pumped out of it in an efficient manner, which, results in no blood flow.
Yeah.
So the only way to fix that is also the same way with the defibrillator. So those two things, if somebody is in one of those things, you can do CPR on them. all day. Well, I shouldn't say that. Generally, CPR won't do anything for those folks.
Gotcha.
I only say that because there used to be this thing that we did back in the old days called the precordial thump, which was when you started off doing CPR, you basically like hammer fisted somebody, like right in the sternum very hard. And you kind of see them like do it sometimes on old movies like Airplane. You remember that movie?
Oh, yeah.
Airplane,
Yeah.
They
all take turns.
Yeah. And a girl, like, when that girl started to kind of code out, like, punched her in the chest.
Yeah.
Well, I only say that because I've actually seen it work.
Oh, no kidding.
So, if you think about it, when you hit somebody, especially if you hit them in tissues that have the capability to generate their own electrical current, like your heart, you actually are delivering a shock.
Oh, wow.
And if you have body armor on and I shoot you, and the bullet hits you when your heart is in diastole, which is when it is in basically it's repolarizing. If you kind of think from an electrical perspective, it's recharging itself to be able to discharge its energy one more time. If you stop that process, that's how people die of sudden, like acute cardiac syndrome. And, like when you hear about these athletes that, have the basketball and they're going up and they're, under the key, and then they go up and they come down and they just instantly, are out cold and they die.
Yeah.
That's the same kind of thing. So that shock, just hitting the heart when it's in its diastole phase, is enough to potentially stop somebody's heart. But it's also potentially enough energy to if you strike them to basically do the exact same thing. So there was a time when I was working in the ER, in Spokane, Washington, when I was still an undergrad, and there was a man and a woman that came in, and this woman had the flu for, several weeks that was not resolved by any over-the-counter medicine. So she came to the ER. It turned out that lady had like stage 4 lung cancer that had metastasized like through her body. She wasn't very old. She was like less than 40, about 38. And her husband was there, and he was, a commensurate age. And immediately he kind of said, when he got the news, it was a, big shock to everybody. And, immediately he kind of started to turn sort of ashen gray, which is, usually the precursor to somebody having like what we call a vasovagal or a syncopal episode, meaning that their vagus nerve becomes overstimulated to the point where, they'll pass out because they can't maintain their blood pressure at a high enough level to get oxygen to their brain. So I immediately got a wheelchair and kind of, scooped this guy up from behind him. And a nurse and I went into the, one of the adjoining rooms, and we were going to lift this guy up onto the gurney and kind of get him hooked up to make sure he was okay. And while we were moving him, he literally said like, I don't feel very good. And his head just like went like this, and he fell back immediately. And we had just put him on the monitor.
Oh, wow.
When we put him on the monitor, I saw that he was in
coding.
refib.
Yeah.
And so I, looked at the nurse that I was with, and I said, precordial thump. And I just whacked him, and I hit him like as hard as I could. Not as hard as I could. I hit him pretty hard, in the sternum. And it instantly, we both like looked at the monitor, because this guy just went like, like that, like recoiled, and he pinked back up like almost instantly.
Yeah.
And then we both were like going through the tape, on the monitor, because we wanted to see like where that spike was, and it was actually there. So I only say that because,
well, I mean, there's science. You saw it. It's irrefutable. Yeah.
Right. So I only say that because, now we say that with early defibrillation, you can stop, a lot of these cardiac arrhythmias, and CPR won't do anything for them. I don't like to say do anything for them because, this is biology. There is enough variation in organisms, even though we're all the same. There is enough normal variation amongst us that things like that do happen.
Sure.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So like the reason I'm saying that is because CPR would kind of approximate the same effect under those similar circumstances, but not every time, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So defibrillating somebody is the treatment of choice for, cardiac arrhythmias that are amenable only to defibrillation.
So that's a method that changed after more science came around. Is that correct?
I think it was kind of one of those things that, probably back in those days, in the 70s, the 80s, and maybe even the early 90s, there was still a lot of anecdotal stuff where, things would just kind of get passed on. And I would say like, hey, Mark, why do we do this? And you would just be like, shut up, kid. Just do it, And then the reason that you would say that is because, 10 years before that, you asked some guy like, hey, Al, why do we do the precordial thump? And he was like, shut up, kid. You just do it.
Institutional inbreeding. Yeah.
Yeah. He didn't know the answer either. And so that's not just, in medicine or law enforcement or dentistry or anything. It's just kind of pervasive throughout the world. There's a lot of people running around doing stuff that they have no idea why they're doing it. If you can kind of whittle it down to why you're actually doing something and you have a good command of the science behind it, like I said, earlier, why it's such a feather in one's cap to have a strong basis in the physical and biological sciences is because you can, if you knew nothing else about it, from a medical perspective, you could still understand what was going on scientifically. Same kind of thing.
You ever hear anything about civilian trying to help, obviously, another civilian or something like that, and maybe doing something wrong and having repercussions because of it?
I've never heard of it. I mean, most places have a Good Samaritan law, so as long as you're not doing anything, ridiculous. So like, let's say, okay. So the common hypothetical that people give is, for example, you're at a restaurant and you see some guy, I think it was maybe in the Bourne Identity or something like that, where this guy starts choking, he has an upper airway obstruction. And somebody remembers back to a MASH episode that they saw, where they, take a ballpoint pen, who even has those these days, and then screws it, and takes the barrel of the pen and, makes an incision in the guy's, trichothyroid cartilage and then pushes the tube in there, and then the guy can breathe again and hooray, he saved the day. Well, there's a lot of, no surprise to anybody that actually knows this, but there's a lot of, really important vasculature that's in there. And if you cut any of those, everything's going to turn into a big mess really quick, even if it's a vein, not necessarily even just an artery. This whole kind of fossa area right here.
Yeah, down in your, that thing of shoving a pin in their throat to make a straw that they can breathe through, you could bleed them out.
Correct. Yeah. So if you had the training to be able to do, an emergency, crisis in the field, then, right on, like, and it doesn't go well, you had the training. So, somebody at some point said, David Yancey has the skills and the capabilities to be able to execute this skill in the field, and it is allowed by, whoever he works for. But if you, screw that up, you're still covered. That's still kind of covered under your liability. For a regular person, though, it's a different kind of thing. If for a regular person, if you do not have that skill in your armamentarium, and you weren't taught that or learned that through some sort of certification process, you do it and it turns out fine, then everything's great. Yeah. If you do it and it doesn't turn out fine, then you're going to end up holding the bag for that.
Yeah. So I guess that's what I was wondering. Then, the first case you were talking about, that's really the risk to a professional who has a license of some sort, either a nurse, a doctor, an EMT, et cetera. There's a little bit of maybe some indemnification in there that they were trained to do it and it just didn't work out satisfactorily. So I hate to say no harm, no foul, but harm, but no foul. But
sure. Well, I don't think of it as a harm. Like one of the things that people really get twisted these days is they don't understand the difference between malpractice and a bad outcome. Okay, because somebody has a bad outcome doesn't necessarily mean that whoever, was the provider that, did the service, committed malpractice. It just means that they had a bad outcome.
Right.
It happens all the time. That's why, anytime if you've ever had an elective surgical procedure, or even an elective dental procedure, the provider or his staff or both should always tell you, the risks and the benefits of any procedure, and things that can go wrong. So, unfortunately, when you are driving down, I-40 out by, 840 or Lebanon or any of those places out there, and you roll up on a car accident and somebody's bleeding profusely out the neck, I can't run up there and go, "Hey, I'm Dr. Sherman House. I have, would you like me to help you today?" It just kind of goes without saying that, somebody in a situation, if it wasn't me, if it was anybody, is going to want somebody to help them.
Yeah, there's that implied consent, right? So,
correct. Yeah. So that's, we're lucky that Tennessee is a very pro rescuer state. As long as you do everything that you can to benefit somebody without doing anything stupid. And what I mean by stupid is things that you have no business doing.
Sure.
Then you're going to be okay.
Well, I guess it goes without saying, then our listeners really need to be a little bit savvy, or very savvy, not a little bit, but they just need to flat be savvy with what the laws are in their state to protect them as a caregiver in a case like that. And that's something that I'm sure that training in a person's given state should educate them on, is this is what your risks are, this is what your protections are, et cetera.
Well, I think the one that kind of comes, I think the one that kind of comes to mind with me is like the improper use of a tourniquet, whether it was needed or not needed. And then the limb, then was unsavable or something like that. And I think that's, I think I've heard that a few times or read about that a few times.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, so for me, a civilian, come across another civilian, I throw a tourniquet on, and then it was deemed later that wasn't what was needed. Do I have is there any repercussions?
I do have a section that I want to talk about some myths, and I think that one in particular about tourniquets and limbs, et cetera, is in there. Let me ask this before we go into your response to that, Dr. House. We're at about the midpoint break. So what I'd like to do is just let's take a few minutes for ourselves, and we'll top off our beverages and all that other fun stuff. We'll pay the bills, and then we'll come back and we'll pick that up. I definitely want to hear about that, hear your thoughts on that. And then maybe if we could, I think maybe, well, anyway, I've got a little bit more I want to talk about the basic medical skills that a civilian should possess. But then I want to pick your brain and ask some questions to help our listeners sort out maybe the I'm going to call it the fun side of it, because we all like to buy cool stuff. What are some of the things that a person should have in their toolkit, so to speak? So, okay. Sure. Very cool. All right. So we'll do that. We'll break, and folks, we'll be right back with you here in just a minute. Please stay tuned. Hey folks, David here. By now, regular listeners of the show are well acquainted with Mark and our friends over at Squared Away Customs. You already know that they are a manufacturer of high-quality custom Kydex holsters and carry gear for civilians, military, and law enforcement. But what you might not know is that Squared Away Customs is also your one-stop source for weapon-mounted lights and other firearms accessories. Mark, Corey, and the gang are now also stocking dealer for Polymer 80 frames and slides, and of course, have holsters to fit. What is Polymer 80, you ask? They are 80% complete polymer frames that you finish out with Glock pistol components. Because you're building it, there's no serial number, no FFL required, and no registration needed. It's a great way to build a custom Glock-style pistol of your own creation. Squared Away Customs offers Polymer 80 frames compatible with Glock model 17, 19, 22, 23, 26, 27, 34, and 35 Generation 3 components. They come in 2 different grip styles and include features like an extended beaver tail, double undercut trigger guard, and a thumb ledge already built in. So, if you're looking for the next level of customization and performance from the Glock platform, head over to squaredawaycustoms.com and check out their Polymer 80 accessories and, of course, their Squared Away Customs Polymer 80 custom holsters today. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shooters Nation podcast. It's David. I'm here with Mark and Dr. Sherman House, and we're talking about being the first responder. Sherman, right before we broke, Mark was zeroing in on a point about care and with tourniquets and things like that. So maybe that's a good place to start here to conclude maybe the summary of the basic medical skills that you had taught us in the class that I went through about people, this is something that you should know how to do. And that's the tourniquet. Mark, you had an interesting thing that came up in the break talking about care, particularly for children, and how that might differ. So why don't you take a shot at that and see what Dr. House can tell us in the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to what sort of skill sets can work between both adults and children, and what are separate and what should be done differently.
Well, the concepts are largely the same. A lot of people say like, you treat children like they're small adults, and that's not true. Children kind of have their own unique physiology, and the gear that we carry routinely, like for example, like just say a regular tourniquet, like a cat tourniquet or a soft T wide, type tourniquet that are usually, that's the two most common kinds that you find in triple C type stuff. Neither of those will work really good for, a child, just because they don't have the ability to provide the circumferential pressure that you need for a tourniquet to work adequately. And that's a kind of a marble mouth way to say that they just don't shrink down small enough. You can't crank it down small enough to make the loop of the tourniquet fit firmly around the limb. So there are kind of adjustments to the equipment and the technique that's necessary to use if you have, small children. And I talk about that, and I kind of show some examples of that using things like the rat tourniquet or the TK4 type tourniquets. They're more like an elastic band, that you can wrap circumferentially to get a tournication effect without having to crank down with a windlass type tourniquet like the soft T and the cat T.
Makes perfect sense if you think about the tourniquet design, because the cat and the soft T, the strap on those is about 2 inches wide, if I'm not mistaken. And then, if you think about a small child, 2 inches of width,
could be their whole arm,
could be their whole upper arm or their whole upper leg, and that's not going to work to necessarily to do what you're after here. So that makes perfect sense.
Correct. And then also, like when you cinch that thing down, it might not be able to cinch down small enough so that the diameter of it is small enough. Then when you crank it down, it actually almost has like a cutting effect, because you're no longer using the full width of the strap, essentially. So yeah, you kind of have to modify your technique a little bit. And then, like we were talking about earlier, with CPR, rescue breathing, defibrillator pad placement, all those things vary with children as well. So you have to be cognizant of those, because for you to be able to deliver the interventions most effectively, you need to do them appropriately for that size individual. Mm-hmm. So yeah, especially for people that have children, I think it's a foregone conclusion that you just, it's like, how to put the car seat in their car, you do, then you should also know how to do all of these things to rescue your kid. And, how does David, like, pools are so ubiquitous here, in the South,
right?
That like everybody that lets their kids swim in a swimming pool, even if it's at the YMCA, should rely on the lifeguard, who might be too busy texting or, talking to some girl he's got a crush on at the pool to be worried about your tot. Mm-hmm. When you can jump in there and save them and do the exact same thing that the lifeguard's going to do.
Right.
So, or that the fire department's going to do when they show up, a couple minutes later. So,
well, this training's not very expensive or very time consuming, because at break, I quickly flipped over and I started Googling. It looks like the American Red Cross offers a class that covers CPR for adults, infants, and just young children, as well as Heimlich and AED use. And we're talking like $70 and maybe a couple hours that gets you a certification on it. So that's pretty legit.
Yeah. And there's a lot of community centers around Nashville and stuff too, where I know people do it for free. So it's just kind of one of those things that, I would recommend that people check out Eventbrite, and I know that because that's where I sell tickets to my classes, and I routinely search on there, what's going on in my zip code. And, my zip code is also Vanderbilt zip code. So, I see the classes that go on there. But, there's literally a medical class going on all the time.
That's a good tip. I'll make sure that I mention Eventbrite in our show notes. I would think also, if you live near a hospital or medical center, you could probably check with them and see what classes they offer as well.
Yeah, all hospitals or major medical facilities all have like continuing education departments is usually how it's called, because you have to remember that in addition to training folks from the community that are interested in these kinds of things as basically, for lack of a better term, an extracurricular activity, there's people that have to maintain these skills, like your wife or like me. Like we're required by the state that issues our license to maintain continuing education to the tune of however many hours a year it is in these requisite skills that they require for us to be able to keep our license. So you have to be able to get these skills, and for them to make that accessible to people that work at the hospital, they have these classes at the hospital or somewhere on the hospital campus.
Yeah.
To where you can basically fit it into your work day, if that makes any sense.
Right. No. Yeah. And from what I've seen, it's some companies. It's worth our listeners checking into this. Some of the companies out there offer. Or they receive insurance discounts for themselves if they have people on staff that are trained in things like CPR and Heimlich and AED and whatnot, that it might be advantageous to your employer to see you take this class. So they might give you the comp time to go do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, especially now, like one of the number one causes of death, is workplace, injuries and workplace violence. Sure. I mean, I think it's in the top 10 now as far as like, ways to die if you're in the American workforce. Somebody needs to fact check me on that, but I feel like that's correct or near correct. But of course, the 67.8% of all statistics are made up on the spot. So,
that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Run that through the Snopes. But yeah, it's one of those things that, like I said, when it's least expected, you're elected. And I would much rather be the guy that can stand up and say like, I got this, than be the person that'll just be like, I'm glad that's not happening to me.
Right. Yeah. I wish I'd taken that class.
So yeah, I mean, I've also, been in the weird circumstance to actually be on a commercial airline flight before when, they've gotten on the PA and said, is there a doctor or any type of emergency medical personnel on board? And I've like raised my hand and the flight attendant, come and grab me and been like,
oh, great.
Here's all of our stuff. Make it work.
Pop quiz. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What's gonna, fix this guy? Do we need to land the plane? And so, yeah, you have to, I mean, you don't have to, but I would much rather just by my very nature be the guy that has the answer than the guy that does it, being that, my life and my financial well-being kind of depend on me being the guy that has the answer.
Well, you would hope that somebody would rise to that occasion if that were you and that they would reciprocate.
Yeah. Like if you have the skills, I would hate for somebody to be like, man, this crossword puzzle is really good. And I just don't feel like
I'd save this guy, but the Sudoku here is really,
it's
really
just good. Intense. Yeah. I'm in a solid game here with this old gal sitting next to me. So, yeah.
So I have some other questions for you. So I think that, we've pretty well consensus formed.
Oh, sorry. Let me interrupt one thing.
Go ahead.
So tourniquet use as far as tourniquet safety and still the urban legends about tourniquets. Okay?
Oh, yeah. So let's kill that one.
Orthopedic surgeons on a regular basis and podiatrists on a regular basis and hand surgeons on a regular basis both tourniquet and exsanguinate, meaning they squeeze all the blood, from your fingertips or from the tips of your toes all the way up into your body and then put a tourniquet on there so that it makes it easier to work on people when you're doing major types of reconstructive surgery or knee replacement or even something as simple as a carpal tunnel release.
Right.
To do it in what we call a bloodless surgical field, meaning that when you're in there working, it's a lot easier to see the anatomy and where you are if there's not blood squirting and pumping out all over the place.
So wait, you're saying that legitimately doctors will squeeze the blood out of your extremity, out of your hands, legs, feet, arms, up back towards your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm guessing you're about to say they ratchet down a tourniquet and block it off.
Well, yes. We don't use windlass type tourniquets.
Okay.
In the OR we use, generally it looks like a blood pressure cuff, except it's hooked to a compressor that fills the cup with nitrogen.
Okay.
And nitrogen, because think about the science here. Why would it be nitrogen? I generally think it's probably because it's easier to compress.
Yeah. Well, it's inert.
So, and it's inert, and then you're not going to have to worry about, we use cauteries and things like that in the OR frequently. So,
Sure.
anything with a spark and oxygen accelerant would really be bad.
Right.
With a really quick ending.
We've compounded the problem at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you've created, all kinds of injuries. But yeah, that's done frequently, and it's not unusual, to have them turned on and left on there for a couple hours, 2 hours. And there's no lingering after effects.
So the myth being that wherever you put that tourniquet, that's where the doctor is going to get the saw and cut that arm or that leg off.
Well, yeah, or you're going to end up having to, you're going to have compartment syndrome, or you're going to have, rhabdomyolysis, or any number of bad outcomes.
Scary sounding medical terms. Yeah.
Yeah. If you put the tourniquet correctly, and that person gets whisked off to a care facility with great haste, then if that tourniquet was placed there for the right reasons, the only thing it's going to do is keep more blood in their body than not.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that's the point, right? I mean, you've got the option of either tourniquet, stop the bleeding, or no tourniquet,
or bleeding to death.
And this guy bleeds out in a few minutes.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like when you took the class, I made it a point in the handout to put that drawing that I made.
Yes.
That you put the tourniquet on the arm, or you put the tourniquet on the leg. And I teach people the proper anatomy of what is an arm and what is a leg. The arm is the area between your armpit, essentially, your shoulder and your elbow.
Right.
And your leg is the part from your crotch down to your knee.
Right.
So that's the only two places the tourniquets go. The American Red Cross, in their video, they actually show them putting a tourniquet for this laceration on this guy's hand. They show him putting it here, and that's
like right above his wrist.
Right above his wrist, and kind of just like in the middle of his forearm, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's just wrong. It's just not. There's no universe that exists in where that's correct tourniquet placement.
Well, you explained even that your lower arm, two bones, and the veins run in between them. So if you're compressing, you're not compressing anything useful.
Yeah, you're going to compress the arteries that are on the outside, that are basically, laying in parallel to the bone, so that it doesn't stop the collateral circulation, which is the small arteries that feed, that basically cross that space.
Yeah.
And then you're also not going to stop the arteries that are in between the bones. So there's, the only way to stop those is basically hit them, for lack of a better term, further upstream.
Yeah.
Where, you have the largest diameter vessel in your arm, which is your brachial artery. So if you shut that thing off, that's where you go wrong. And kind of to answer your question, Mark, I don't know if we talked about it live or on the break, but, with tourniquet use, if somebody has arterial bleeding, the only thing that is indicated there as far as intervention is tourniquet use, period. Like, end of story. If you could control arterial bleeding with direct pressure, like, you're awesome. And you probably have, hands that can also like smash walnuts, because that's going to take a tremendous amount of pressure to be able to do it. I'm not saying that people haven't done it. Like, people have done it. But, direct pressure is always kind of like what saves the day. It's just a matter of how you apply the direct pressure. So the tourniquet is the only part that doesn't apply direct pressure directly.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It basically applies direct pressure indirectly
upstream.
Upstream. Yeah. That's kind of the best way to think about it in non-scientific terms.
So since we're talking about applying pressure, I have to ask, and we're kind of in this Mythbusters mode. So I've got another myth I want to ask you about, and then I definitely want to ask about some, some of the fun stuff like, equipment and shopping to put together a kit and that kind of thing. But this conversation has come up, no joke, 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Tampons in your med kit, using them for wound packing. And that's just, it's false. Is that correct? It's just not useful, or does it depend?
Well, let's say,
depends.
It depends. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so think about it this way. Okay. Let's say that, so a tampon, is basically not a blood stopping, instrument. It basically just makes a woman's, menses, her menstrual cycle, easier to clean up after.
Right. It's an absorber.
It's an absorbent material.
Right.
So all it's doing is just absorbing. And everybody, when they were in junior high, saw somebody, snake a tampon out of some poor unsuspecting girl's bag and throw it into the swimming pool, or, throw it in the water fountain and see that it, triples in size.
Right.
So the disconnect happens where people think that a bullet hole, like let's just say a 9mm bullet hole, like through your forearm, is going to make a 9mm hole, like from the front to the back, like, a completely cylindrical, tubular void, if you will, like through your arm. They're going to be able to just hold it up like a Quentin Tarantino movie and see through this hole.
Look through it, right? Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true. So depending on, a myriad of factors, not limited to choice in bullet, where the bullet hit, if it hit bone, if it knocked bone out of place, there's just so many variables that, you may look at that tampon that's depending on the size of them, a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch in diameter, I guess, according to brand. You may look at that and go, hey, I can just jam this right in that hole and that's going to stay. And that's going to, it's going to apply enough direct pressure, which is what it's doing, which is what any wound packing does, is it applies direct pressure directly inside of the wound. You're going to think that that's going to work. But the science and the why falls apart when you consider that you don't have X-ray hands, nor do you have CT hands. So you can't ascertain in the field the volume of that space.
That wound channel. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I drop something in there, that is, if I drop something that is essentially, the diameter of, let's just say like the overall volume of a ping pong ball into something that is the volume of a grapefruit or a softball, then I have done nothing.
Right.
So the ideal intervention for a situation like that is, some type of gauze, that you can pull off and expand and fill that wound cavity with until it's actually filled. And that way, if you think about it mechanically, you don't even have to think about, the science involved here. All you're doing is providing direct pressure right on the wound. So all of those busted blood vessels that are inside there, whether they're arteries or veins or whatever, they're bleeding. Yeah. And by applying that gauze directly to them, and I mean, when you pack a wound and you do it right, it's like for a conscious patient, it's going to be very, very painful. But sometimes people don't notice it at all. It's just kind of one of those things. It depends, but it's not unusual to jam, that piece of gauze that I, have in the kits that you guys use in the class, is about, 9 to 12 feet long.
Yeah. 12 feet. Yeah.
It's not unusual for that whole thing to like go into a wound and just have a little piece of tail hanging out. So it's, that's the best thing to use. Now, have people use maxi pads and stuff before? Absolutely. Like I've used maxi pads before on a guy that I worked on the armored truck with. That one of the guys hit the air brake, and the dude was standing in the wheel well in the back of the truck and hit his face on the aluminum hand truck, in this mount on the bulkhead, and like split his face wide open, above his eyebrow. And this, lady ended up volunteering a maxi pad, and we smacked that thing on there.
Like a compression dressing on the exterior, though, right? So yeah, you're not packing a wound.
So, So yeah, I mean, it's as if in a crunch, will it work? Sure. Is it an ideal solution?
Yeah.
Is it purpose built? No, it is not.
Right.
It's an improvised material, and it's going to serve for an improvised purpose. But if I got to some place as the secondary responder and somebody had jammed a few tampons into a bullet wound and it had stopped, meaning that there's not like blood just dripping out of the bottom of it,
yeah,
I would have just been like, all right, like right on. I'm not going to pull those out and jam my gauze in there.
Sure.
I'm just going to kind of press on from there.
So let me transition us into another segment before we run out of time with you tonight. I think that one of the, other than the cool factor of learning how to save lives and just equipping yourself with knowledge that's very useful like this, for me, one of the cool things is something tangible you can hold in your hands, right? So that's part of the reason why we all like to buy guns and things, because hey, look, I got this cool thing that I've got. My new fascination is the different medical equipment to come up with a good, well-rounded kit, either as a individual first aid kit or an IFAC or a jump bag for something that's in the car. What can you tell us about that? And maybe let me frame it this way. Is there any gear that a person should absolutely carry on their person as a first question? And then as a follow-on to that, what should they then have in a larger bag in their vehicle or in their home?
Okay. So, I think that, the things that you should carry on your person are the things that are hard to improvise in this field. So a windlass type tourniquet is hard to improvise in this field. I know everybody's going to say like, yeah, but in World War I and World War II and Vietnam, even, they use these straps and triangular bandages with a wooden windlass, made out of a dowel and stuff. Sure they did. But again, I put that under the category of improvised, device, basically. If you can carry a purpose-built tourniquet that you can self-apply or that you can apply to somebody else, like in short order, that just makes better sense. If Mark's bleeding out, of his femoral artery, and I know that we've got, somewhere between 90 seconds and 3 minutes before he loses so much blood that it doesn't matter if this happened in the OR, we'd be able to save him. Then I'm going to want something that I can slap on there and have shut down within 15 seconds. And that's really hard to do with the improvised tourniquet, especially
everybody thinks they're going to use their belt or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if you actually, this is one of the things we do in one of my classes is I have a Doppler ultrasound machine, which, is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a machine that that you can run it across vasculature, and deep arteries. If they're pulsing, even with a tourniquet on, then I can hear it, and it just goes, and it makes that noise.
Yeah.
And so what we do is, people that go like, well, I don't need to carry a tourniquet because I wear, a wilderness frequent flyer belt, and I can cinch that puppy down and it'll do it, and I go, okay, cool. Well, go ahead. Let's do it. And then I actually, make them take their sock and their shoe off, and I draw, an X, on their pedis dorsalis or the posterior tibial, artery where you can feel the pulse. And then I say, okay, like now we'll put the ultrasound on it after you've applied your tourniquet, in quotations, and let's hear if there's a difference in perfusion. And there isn't. I mean, there's a difference. Maybe it's a little bit quieter in that, like, you're restricting some of the blood flow, but very rarely. I mean, I've yet to see somebody with a true belt where they'll occlude the artery like they would. And I go, okay, now here, let me put the soft tee on you, or the cat tee like we used in the class, and cinch that puppy down, and then let's go to those same spots and listen. You're not going to hear anything because it's shut off.
So a good tourniquet on your person.
a good tourniquet on your person. I literally do not leave the house without a tourniquet on my person. I keep them, like I showed you guys in the class. I have those seats or I have the kits that are rigged to the head mount on the back of my seats in my truck. So whether my truck is upright or upside down or whatever, there's a tearaway red bag right behind my head that I can kind of grab almost like an ejection seat handle. Mm-hmm. And I can get that, or I could, tell my son or whoever's around, like, hey, go grab the red bag from the back of my truck and get it. That's got all the same stuff in it. So I always have the tourniquet accessible to me. Now, one of my good buddies, Eli Miller, he also recommends, he's also a very skilled combat medic overseas. And he recommends, that people actually carry, a quick clot type of sponge or gauze on them, just because that's another thing that you can't improvise. Right. So, I talk about it like really briefly in my class because, we have so much stuff that we're trying to cover in a short amount of time. But quick clot, the research is kind of ambiguous at this point, whether on a normal physiology person, a person who isn't taking a blood thinner, whether, conventional gauze wound packing or hemostatic gauze wound packing is more effective. On a person who takes a blood thinner, though, however, it is obviously, tipped in favor of the hemostatic agent or the hemostatic gauze or sponge. So, if you're a person that has, cardiac issues or congestive heart failure or AFib or something like that, where it's indicated, or, a history of strokes or whatever, or you have somebody like that, in your tribe, I would definitely recommend keeping a hemostatic on you, just because, especially with the new generation anticoagulants that we have, like you hear about these commercials, with like Pradaxa or Eliquis, some of these other drugs, they don't work like Coumadin. Coumadin is the old rat poison derived, anti blood thinner that has been used safely for, has a huge margin of safety, but also has a reversal agent. You can give somebody vitamin K and it'll reverse, if you give them too much blood thinner, or if they're having a bleeding event, you can give them vitamin K and reverse it. You can't do that with these new generation of blood thinners. You have to wait until it's out of the system. Oh, wow. Well, if you wait until it's out of their system, not only will the Eliquis be out of their system, but so will all their blood. So
right,
the clotting agent, the hemostatic agent really is absolutely invaluable.
I guess better safe than sorry. If you can add that to your kit, add it to your kit, because you might not know, especially if you're rendering aid to a stranger, you have no idea what their medical history
what they got going on.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, occasionally, like, people still wear medic alert bracelet jewelry, around their neck or around their wrist, but it's I don't think it's really as common as it once was. And a lot of times people will just program this stuff in their phone. Like, you're gonna think like, wait, is it? I hit the iPhone, on button 5 times, and then their emergency medicine information comes. I don't even know what it is. But it's one of those. Maybe it's 3 times. I don't know. But anyway, you just don't ever know. So keeping I think that's a smart thing too. And, with a lot of the ankle med kits that people have now that they use to carry a tourniquet, you can fit a hemostatic sponge or a gauze, a compressed gauze in one of those, like, very easy. It's very flat and small and quite compact. So I'm kind of a nerd, I wear carpenter type pants or cargo pants just about every day. And then I wear a similar kind of pant when I'm on duty. So, I always just keep those things like in those pockets just because they're always there. And I got other stuff on my ankles. So that's how I do it. But, like I said, as far as what you keep on yourself, I think it's smart to keep the things that you can't easily improvise, which is a windlass tourniquet and hemostatic agent.
So back in the jump bag in their car, if you will, if a person wants to go to that length and have a little bit more kit with them, what would you add to that? Is that where you start adding the stuff that maybe more tourniquets just in case you're at a, I think Las Vegas, exactly.
Sure.
Las Vegas taught us a lot about mass casualty events and things.
Yeah. I mean, like, I brought it inside, the kit that I keep in my truck, which is that big. I carried in a Maxpedition. I'm not sure what the model is, but it's basically like a sling pack.
I bought one of those after that class on your recommendation. It's the Versa pack, like the Fat Boy Versa pack or whatever that thing's called.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I keep enough stuff. Basically, I take the regular kit, that I recommend, people use. They don't have to use my kit, but those components or something analogous to those components.
Mm-hmm.
I basically have that times 5 in there. So I have all that stuff. And I mean, like if I'm going camping or something like that, I bring a whole other one that has, everything that I might need environmental wise stuff, splinting wise stuff, in addition to like the bleeding. Yeah, things like that. But just for the stuff that I use the most, and that Maxpedition bag gets used. I've used it several times.
No kidding.
Just because I drive up on car accidents so frequently. And you live out here. Like it's kind of a no man's land once you get between Lebanon and Cookeville. There's really nothing out there.
Yeah, we've had several guests talk about that driving in the back roads and encounter an accident, an automobile accident, and they're the first person there. And
So, I like that bag, because I can maneuver with it really easily. I'm like a wider guy, and backpacks are just not, unless you get a backpack that's like made for, a person with wide shoulders, it doesn't really work very well. And I like that one because I can kind of push it out of the way. I can push it in the front of me and see exactly where it's at. I can, use my flashlight and look in it and then push it back behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And it also has a pocket on the outside where I put the very thick nitrile rubber gloves. So the thing that your wife was talking about with, rubber gloves for team safety. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I do everything in gloves. Like, it's kind of weird. Like sometimes even when I clean guns or like do home improvement work around the house, I put on rubber gloves just because I'm weird. And I put on rubber gloves when I repair people's mouths and skulls too. So it's like second nature for me, and I kind of feel weird without them.
So particularly her question was, should rubber gloves should definitely be part of your kit then? I mean,
sure. Yeah. And you can get, even on like Amazon, you can get nitrile rubber gloves that are specifically made like for, fire, EMS, second responder type folks that are much thicker, almost to the kind like they're almost as thick as like the kind that, your mom used to, the yellow gloves that your mom used to wash
dish gloves. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're very rugged and they'll resist tearing and all that kind of stuff. And then they're usually made in a color where if they do get a breach in them, it's very easy to spot.
So let me ask you the flip side to this then. So, we've kind of talked about the tourniquets and the quick clots and the compression bandages and all that stuff. And really, I think I would encourage our listeners, there's so much that we can't cover here. You should go look at Sherman's blog and also look for some classes, either that Dr. House is teaching, if he's close to you or if he's coming near, to your area, but also others in your area. They'll help you sort out some of your kit. But you made a very good point in the class. I'd like for you to talk just briefly about with the listeners about the danger of shopping for some of this equipment online, and particularly eBay and Amazon and stuff like that. You mentioned something that I would have never thought about.
Yeah, well, I used to put like hot links on my webpage to Amazon, for the components, and I basically just did that because if you've never done something like that before, and I said, hey, you need to get a soft T wide, you're going to be like, SOFTY, WIDE? Like, is it, ice cream's going to come up? Like, what the heck?
Right.
So, if I put the links, then people know, oh, this is what I'm supposed to get. Well, Amazon uses like Boolean search criteria. So if I type soft T wide, it's going to also give suggestions for anything else that says soft T wide. And people will go like, holy smokes, this thing's $35.
Yeah.
Like, there's another soft T wide here that is $12. Well, I'll just get the $12 one. What they don't realize is that's either A, counterfeit, medical supplies that are, not North American Rescue, soft T wide, or they're like Chinese replicas that people use to put on their faux plate carriers for milsim and airsoft type games. Either which, like, right on, do your thing, bro. But like, that's not life safety equipment, and we're looking at life safety equipment here. So it's very important that we do that. And it got to the point where it was kind of like, it became an annoyance to me because people would show up with this stuff thinking that, he told me it would cost $65 for all this stuff, and I got all of it for 20 or 25.
Look how much money I saved, right?
Yeah, and then they'd crank down on that tourniquet. We don't put the tourniquets on full strength in that class because there's no purpose in it, and I don't want people, like I said in that class, once we use these things in training, they're dedicated training tools. After that, they're now no longer life safety rated equipment because they've already taken a load. But I also don't want people to like crank those things so hard down, that they're going to injure themselves or break. These, after all, we're doing this on each other, and nobody has any active arterial bleeding here. We're just trying to get the moves down. But people would have these, Fugazi tourniquets, and they'd crank them down, and they would just bust at the D-ring, or bust at the seams, or the windlass would snap, once it has some torsion placed on it.
Yeah.
And so, obviously those are unsatisfactory. So I partnered with a guy, a cool veteran-owned business named The Tactical Medic, a guy named Sean Nealon out in Arizona, and he has a medical supply company, and he put together this kit called the Civilian Defender IFAC. And I'm with absolute full disclosure, I don't make a dime off of that thing. It's just, I do that simply as a benefit to my students because I want them to train with good equipment, and that is good equipment. And then I also want them to have a resource where they can go, okay, I have this kit that I used in the class, and now I know how to use the components. And now I want to get 2 of these, one to put in underneath my kitchen sink, and another one to put in my truck. And here's where I can get them. And they're exactly the same as the one that I trained on. And all the components are the same. And it has everything you need there. It's literally like a turnkey system. It has gloves. It has the tourniquet. It has the gauze. It has the pressure bandage. And it has the chest seals. So it's all, right there.
Fantastic. Yeah. Make sure that.
And it's actually very inexpensive compared to if you buy the parts a la carte.
Yeah.
It's $65 for the kit. And a lot of these kits, are just super expensive. So, but you don't just have to get my kit. Like any of the guys that do this stuff, that I consider, we're all friends. It's not like I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I make. I don't make any money, teaching these classes for $50.
Sure.
I would make a lot more money if I would just stay in the operatory and do work. But I do this as a public safety and a continuation of my service to the country.
Sure.
And so I, any of the guys, whether it's Terry Davis at Dark Angel Medical, whether it's my buddy Caleb Cosby at Lone Star Medic, they all have kits. Everybody kind of has their little idiosyncrasies as far as like, maybe one guy likes the cat key, maybe the other guy likes the soft key, but really like. The algorithm for using them is basically the same. As far as how you mechanically use them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, other guys like, I like the H bandage, the flat H bandage. A lot of other guys like the Oles bandage. It's other guys like the Israeli bandage, but they all do the same thing. So it's kind of one of those things where like, you may be I can't remember. I think maybe you're an HK guy or something, like, I'm a Smith & Wesson.
I'm reformed. I'm now pretty much squarely in the Glock camp, which makes Mark happy.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay. Yeah. So it's just kind of like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. It's all the same thing. Like all roads lead to Nashville.
Yeah.
Like to say, it's all the same kind of stuff. It's just a matter of like personal preference. But I recommend people get all of them just so that they can kind of see what it is.
Sure.
Because you might end up rendering aid on somebody with now, in addition to having defibs out in the public, there's a lot of these bleed stop kits, which is like a big red bag, with these little single serving containers that come out that have basically all the same stuff that are in any of our kits.
Yeah.
You might have trained in my kit, or you might have trained in Carrie's kit or Caleb's kit. And then you get this bleed stop kit and you're like, okay, I think I know what these components do the same thing, but I think that this one works like this. But it's good to just, that's why I bring that huge duffel bag of different bandages to class.
Yeah, you kind of had the Santa's bag of tricks with all sorts of different stuff in it, which was really fun.
There's literally like variations upon variations of these things. And they come in different colors, and they come in different lengths, and they come in different widths. And it's just, some of them are packed flat, some of them are packed round. It just depends on what your application is.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make sure that we put a couple of these companies in our show notes, Dark Angel and your friend's company out in Arizona. I think you said is where it was. So, Texas. Okay. I just insulted him. So by saying it was Arizona. So
he'll fight you.
Yeah.
About 6 months ago, we at Squared Away Customs started giving a coupon code and on kind of like a postcard thing for Odin Medical.
Odin, yeah.
We ship out with every outgoing order.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, let's get all these in there, and then people
there's
can.
Other ones.
Can
like I said, I don't have any monopoly on this material. My presentation is probably a little bit different than most people's, because like you saw my PowerPoint presentation, if you stole my laptop or you took a picture of each one of my slides, it's not really going to make much sense to you, because that PowerPoint presentation is just there to show you pictures and remind me of the things that I need to talk about.
Right.
It's like triggers, it's verbal triggers or visual triggers for me. It's not things that if you jot those down, you look at them an hour later, you're going to be like, what the hell was he talking about here?
Right.
Like the point is for you to remember the story that goes along with the slide.
That's right.
Not for you to, absorb the words that are on the slide.
Yeah.
I hate death by PowerPoint. Literally at this point in my career,
it was an okay PowerPoint.
Yeah. I've sat through PowerPoints before where I've come to classes for like virology and stuff. And I've just been like, dude, just give me a copy of your PowerPoint and I'll see you at the test.
And no lecture. Yeah, right.
Yeah. There's no point in going to that and hearing somebody read PowerPoints to me. Like, I know how to read. So yeah, that's not how I do it. And I'm much more, much more into, making people understand the material through explanation. And like I said, the way I do it is by explaining the scientific why.
The why. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great place to come to. I hate to say it. This happens every time, Mark. Every stinking time. We could do this for hours and still not get everything that I wanted to talk about. But I think that where you kind of brought us back full circle to the why, the scientific why, and the fundamental reasons of.
I would just even say, like, if I could fit a final word in there, is
absolutely
like one of the things that you put in the show notes is like, how do you vet someone's training, to see if it's a worthwhile, worthwhile purchase or a pursuit for you. Is if that person can't tell you the why of everything that they're telling you to do, just, thank them, listen to the class, get what you can out of it, and then go find somebody that can teach you the why. The guys that I talked about, those are guys that I know personally, that I consider, peers in the field, and any of those guys can tell you the why of anything that we do. And I can tell you the why of this stuff, like down to the cellular level, if you've got time and you want to sit around and hear it. But like most people don't. That's why this class is 4 hours.
Right.
I could talk about this stuff like for weeks, but
right.
Like I said in the class, the best way for me to teach you nothing is to teach you everything I know.
Sure.
So, I stole that from James Yeager. So, it's just one of those things that I know all kinds of stuff, and I could just bore you to death and make you fall asleep with this stuff. But I would rather give you 4 hours of high yield condensed information that is just totally has the fat trimmed away, And then that gives you enough of a solid basis for you to be able to run with this stuff. And it also kind of gives you for lack of a better term, the keys to the city. So you can go like, okay, I have the basic moves now. Now I can, figure out there's a whole other world of tactical medicine out there.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah.
If you choose to jump down that rabbit hole.
Well, it has inspired me, and it definitely was the start that I needed on my journey. So I really appreciate that. Had a lot of fun at the class, and I would encourage any of our listeners that get a chance to sit down and take a class with you or talk to you in a setting like this. You owe it to yourself to do that. Sherman, you've got a gift for being able to communicate very complex, very scientific things in a way that is just very common sense. And that's phenomenal. Mark, have you got anything as we close for Dr. House?
No, I really appreciate your time, and it's just a wealth of knowledge, and makes me want to really get out there and seek as much as I can. I'm a little bit challenged here up in New Hampshire. It's pretty rural, you know what I mean? So I don't get a lot of opportunity to find a lot of good tactical medical training. But
I travel, wherever. I've taught all over the country. So I'll go wherever there's, at least a certain number of people that'll basically pay my plane ticket, in the hotel room to get there. If it's a place that I can drive to from Tennessee, I usually just, do it in one day. So I've got 2 traveling classes coming up. On July 15th, I'm in the Memphis area, and that's on my website. And then August 18th, I'm in Watkinsville, Georgia. And then July 26th through the 28th, I'm in Onalaska, Washington at the Firearms Academy of Seattle at Tom Gibbons's Pacific Northwest Tactical Conference.
There's some disparity between you're going East Coast, West Coast in the blink of an eye there. So yeah, that's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So it's going to be a whirlwind tour over the next 6-7 weeks.
Yeah.
Or so.
And on top of that, you're a practicing physician and a family man and all this other. So you're a busy fellow. I really appreciate your time tonight. Very much so.
Glad to be here.
Well, and I appreciate the sacrifice that your family obviously made to allow you to be here with us tonight too. So, please pass along my appreciation to them. And those are the unsung heroes. It seems like a lot of times the ones that put up with us doing this.
My son, was basically born into this. So whether he wants to be a Jedi Knight or not, he's going to be
right.
Or at least he'll have all
the knowledge.
All of the knowledge, the skills, and the tools. Yeah. But that's and I'm lucky that I have a spouse that understands that this came as OEM equipment for me, and this is part of what I do and what I am, and she understands that, and she's seen me in action before, so she understands the importance of this to me.
Very cool. Sherman, thank you. Dr. House.
Glad to do it.
Glad to have you here. Hope we can get you back on soon and we'll talk more about this. I think next time I would rather just kind of say, hey, Doc, what do you want to talk about? What's pushing to the front of your mind that you want to share with the listeners? And we'll just have at it. I think it'd be fun.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Very good. Folks, definitely head over to civiliandefender.com and read up on Sherman's blog. He has provided a lot of information out there on a variety of subjects. And you even get into firearms, which is fun. And so, please take a moment, head over there and look that up. And if Sherman's going to be near you at either of these or these 3 locations, either in Washington State or Memphis, Tennessee, or Watkinsville, Georgia, over the next few months, and you can avail yourself of that in any way, please do that. I guess at this point, we want to thank the usual suspects, Mark, our patrons who directly support the show and make future episodes possible. If you want to If you want to do that and support the show monetarily, you can do so by visiting shootersnation.com and look for the donate tab. It's not required, but it definitely helps keep the lights on. More importantly, though, the thing that you can do for us that costs you nothing and is invaluable to us is give us feedback. Tell us what you want to hear about on the show. If there's any special guests, any special topics, head over there and use the idea link or the contact us form and just drop us a note. We want to hear from you. Be sure to sign up for our mail blast mailing list while you're there. We use that for announcements about upcoming events, shows, special promotions, etc. Mark, as always, folks can connect with you after the show at where?
info@squaredawaycustoms.com.
Yep.
Or you can go check out the website if you need any Kydex gear, and make sure to use coupon code ShootersNation.
And you guys are definitely in the Polymer 80 game. I saw a guy posted on Instagram earlier today with one of the quick ship holsters that you guys did for the Polymer 80 Glocks.
Yep, we're doing a ton of work with Polymer 80 right now. We're selling the frames, the slides, the barrels, the triggers, and of course making the holsters for them. So
those things are pretty trick. I'm going to have to build one sooner or later.
It's awesome for that DIY guy that wants to do their own thing. You know, because you're really from start to finish completing the project all on your own. So it's
well,
great.
If you're DIYing your Polymer 80 and you slip with the saw, cut your thumb off, now you know not to apply the tourniquet on your lower arm. It goes high up near your armpit. Crank that thing down. So, yeah, absolutely. Please don't cut your thumb off while you're building your Glock. That'd be terrible. You need thumbs to shoot a Glock effectively, I think. I don't know. I've seen guys that do it without thumbs. They're pretty inspiring, but I think it'd be easier for you to. I'm going to stop. We got this far into it. Now I'm going off on a Shooters Nation tangent, and I'm alienating people in our audience again. So I don't know. I just need
That's okay. We're all aliens to some degree or another.
That's right. Oh, me. All right. Well, everybody, hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope that at the very least, this whet your appetite to seek out some medical training and prepare yourself to be the first responder in whatever accidents or emergencies might find their way into your life. But hopefully they don't. And with that, we'll talk to you again soon. Be safe out there.
The preceding segment was a production of the Shooters Nation podcast. Visit us online at shootersnation.com.